Welcome to the podcast of Data and Analytics in Business. We will learn from the leading industry experts using data and analytics to solve the problems and create values in practice. We will also learn where the industry is heading to and how data and analytics will shape the industry in the future. Most importantly, how they are preparing their business for digital transformation and disruption in the future. I'm your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening. In this episode, we have got Eran Vanounou. Eran is the CEO of Varada, a data lake acceleration platform that enables business users and data platform teams to seamlessly carry out analytics directly on their cloud data lake without compromising on query performance. Eran shared with me how he was making the transition from working for the MNC to a startup company in Tel Aviv. As we delve deeper into his journey of this transition, he shared a few advice for any of the executives who plan to follow a similar path to Eran. And I think that is something that you might find useful as more and more people are more comfortable in taking the risk to join the startup. We then move on to talk about the data lake analytics. And what does it mean to run data lake analytics, and how your data engineering team and also business team can take advantage of the data lake analytics. Essentially, as we are collecting more data than ever before, the data lake is becoming increasingly more important than ever. Eran and I talk about the way we should look at the modern data architecture in terms of the team, how they should take advantage, and when they should be using data lake versus the data warehouse. He talked about the importance of still having the data warehouse in place, but equally we understand the challenges of moving the data into data warehouse and the time and the effort that it could take. This is where the data lake and data lake analytics becoming increasingly more important, where you allow your team to access and even apply analytics directly from the data lake. So much so that you can speed up the performance of the analytics that you are wanting to build. So much so, you are able to get more insight with a vast collection of the data that you have got in the data lake. To understand what makes the data lake analytics possible, we dwell and discuss in details about the technology and IP provided by Varada in indexing the underlying data set and the underlying extremely large data set. How this is important is that it will help in improving the performance significantly so that you can quickly retrieve and run analytics on the data lake. If you are a data leader who has been frustrated about the performance of your data lake, who have been wanting to find out how should you structure your data lake versus your data warehouse so that your team can take advantage of what the data lake can offer, and equally you want to understand what is all data lake analytics is about, this is the episode that you do not want to miss. If you have any question for Eran and myself, feel free to send us a message or make sure you connect to Eran on LinkedIn. If you enjoy more episodes like this, make sure you click the subscribe button and leave us a review. I am your host, Jason Tan, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hello, Eran. Welcome to the Analytics Show podcast. Thank you for dialing in all the way from Tel Aviv. I'm super excited to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, and good morning.
Well, it's almost 3 p.m. here, so it's afternoon for me. But this is the great thing about the modern technology, right? Make it so easy for us to communicate. And it's amazing in where we are living. And that is something that I'm super excited to talk about, how all of this technology is changing our life.
Now, before we go into deeper of the main cause, I want to talk a little bit about some of the works that you have done. I'm super excited to learn more about that. So you work from at Sun Microsystems, Oracle, LivePerson, before, like all of these MNC over the last few decades. I'm curious to know what led you to decide in joining Varada.
Yeah, I would point two main things. First of all, if I'm looking at the last, I would say 10 plus years, I specifically focused on data and data analytics. Specifically, if I'm looking at LivePerson and NICE. And I felt that I'm kind of running after my tail. It's pretty complicated to take data and copy that and model it and try so many techniques and technologies to somehow solve the performance and the ability to drive data services to our customers. Specifically, I would say during the last 7-8 years when I had the opportunity as part of NICE and LivePerson, both of them traded in NASDAQ, and I served in a pretty senior role. So I was the CTO of LivePerson, and I was the general manager of the product technology unit at NICE. And then it was clear to me that it's not my problem. I met with the key CIOs, CTOs from the Fortune 500, and I felt that that's not my problem. It's the industry problem. So at the moment that I was exposed to smart guys that came out from Extreme IO with the ideas of, okay, we know probably how to solve that and to eliminate the need to model the data, and we can do that via indexing. That actually put a great motivation. Let's try to solve it for the industry. And we have something in our hands to actually build a company. And that's practically what happened.
That's amazing. And I'm curious to know, though, having joined the startup like Varada and also having worked in all these large MNC, what would be your advice to those senior executives who plan to follow a similar path to yours, to jump and start working at the exciting world of the startup?
Yeah, I started my career in a startup and then grew up to a big ones. But my advice is make sure that you understand the implications of moving from big company to a startup. It's a journey. It's a different state of mind. When you work in a big company, the sky is the limit, or at least you're thinking. It's not true, actually. But you have so many people and so many VPs. And so, your feeling is that everything is possible. And you lose focus in a way because you have the feeling that you can do everything. In a startup, you must focus. You must focus on your key innovation, and you have so many opportunities to go sideways. So that's one thing, is that can you really work in a small environment that does not enable you to explore new things, just to focus on what you innovate and go uphill with your innovation. That's easy to say and do. And the second thing is just go back and work with your hands. When you look, okay, I need to do a presentation. Okay, it's actually me need to do the presentation right now because you don't have so many people surrounding you. You need to prepare a budget. You need to set up a meeting. It's not like working in a big company and everyone organize a meeting for you with Bank of America. And as a startup, try to organize a meeting with top executive in Bank of America. You need to go uphill and work hard to make that happen. So it's a big change, but it keeps you young.
Do you remember any particular person that was so supportive of your decision when you decided to join Varada?
My wife, because she, we are together for many years, and, we work together across the journey of small companies, mid companies, big companies. And it's always good to expose yourself to new opportunities and new challenges. So overall, I would say my wife. Many other people, but yeah.
It's great to have someone, our partner, to be always so supportive of what we do. I'm so excited to hear that. Now, let's move on and talk about your company, Varada. Tell us a little bit more about Varada and your role as the CEO there.
Yeah, let's start with my role as a CEO. It's pretty simple. It's connecting between people, technology, and business. Sounds simple, but that's essentially what I actually need to do. What we do at Varada We practically can think about Varada as infrastructure for big data analytics. So if you want a data platform, that what we do is apply acceleration or smart acceleration strategies. And we do that for your analytic workloads. And we do that in a seamless way. We do it via the key innovation that we have, which is smart and dynamic indexing. What do you get from that, from return on investment? So you should expect a meaningful boost in your performance and concurrency. You can expect overall cost reduction. You can expect an ability to launch data services in a quick time to market and to cope with the business needs. If you zoom out where Varada fit, so we're running within your VPC, we're running on top of your single source of the truth, let's call it on top of your data lake, and below your data consumers, whether it's a BI or data scientists or application, anything that consume data via SQL. And as a result, that we are in between running within your VPC, there's no need for you to move, copy, or model your data. Your single source of the truth will be this data lake.
So tell us a little bit more about this dynamic and adaptive indexing technology. So how does it work and how is it different from any other similar products in the market?
Yeah, so everything that we learned in the university about indexing was like in a traditional databases, that there was like a big table with a column, and then we will apply an index for a specific column fit to the way we use the business. The easy way to explain, very simple, think about a phone book. So someone defined that, okay, we need to look based on your name and family name, and then I will find quickly your number. But if you try to apply the same concept for today, so I will just invent it on the fly, okay? But let's assume that I do want to look for a phone number, but this morning I would like to look for a phone number for people that live in my city, age between 35 to 42, and work in a high-tech industry. That's what I'm looking for. So think about a phone book with thousands of dimensions of attributes per person that everyone want to look for different searches from different reasons because business is dynamic. And I have the data, so I can just do it. So you cannot plan ahead what you actually need to be to index. It's not like the old world of, okay, we know what we need to do, we know the data, let's just index it. So that's one aspect of why indexing today is different. And obviously we can talk about data lake, etc. It's like it's a different approach of a big repository of data from different format and different data sources, etc. It's not like the traditional data that you just index a column.
Now, while I can appreciate the benefit of indexing multiple columns or multiple variables in order to get that efficiency and the speed, but equally, indexing can get really expensive, both from the storage perspective and also the initial creation for the processing power. So how can one balance the cost versus the efficiency or the speed that they want to get out of it? So how does it work then, or how Varada is managing these to make it achievable?
That's a good question. So first of all, there need to be a smartness in the system. What exactly need to be indexed? And by the way, what we need to index today does not mean that we need to do the same thing tomorrow. So it's a dynamic decision. So first of all, how can you apply indexing, which is back-to-back connected to what you really need, but in a continuous way, to make sure that you continue and cope with the business need and index whatever is needed. So that's one thing. It's dynamic decision about what need to be indexed. I would answer that in few layers. First of all, our indexes, and this is a little bit deep in the technology, are adaptive indexes. So we look into the structure of the data and the content of the data in a very small and independent blocks. And think about it that we're applying the right index, the right mathematics that fit into these small blocks. That can be indexed like Lucene for text or a Bloom filter for low or high cardinality. It could be a different index for date, okay? But we will adapt the right index to the right structure and the right small block of data. And we are doing that in a dynamic way, as I mentioned, based on whatever goes within the sequence that hitting the cluster. More than that, we can do that in an elastic way, that we can address peaks or specific demand that happening along the day or along the night based on your business needs. So this ability to be adaptive, dynamic, and elastic bring a lot of value to your business. It's autonomous decisioning what need to be indexed. It's a smart decision about how to index. And it's with the elasticity capability that's also enable you to cope with your business dynamic.
You use the word of Nanoblocks indexing. Can you walk us through how does it work and how is it different to the traditional indexing technology? Because the traditional indexing technology is almost like you pretty much index every single row of that column. And now if they have 100 million or they have 2 billion rows for that single column, that's where the nightmare starts, right? So how is this thing of this nanoblock indexing different to or solving this problem that people face traditionally then?
So first of all, try not 2 or 3 billion, try 850 billion and think about thousands of columns, okay? So this is really big. As I mentioned, our IP and our patent stands behind those nanoblocks, and that's something that I will explain in 2 minutes. It took us a little bit more than 2 years to build it. So that's our core IP. In nutshell, what we are doing is that think about this huge table. Let's assume 900 billion rows across 1,000 columns. Let's think about one of the columns. Let's call it, a temperature. So we are not going to apply an index for the entire 850 billion rows. We will look into a specific small block, what we call nanoblock. It's actually a few kilobytes of data. That's around 50, 60,000 rows. And we are doing 2 things with this nanoblock. We'll look about what is it? Is it a number? Is it a date? Is it a string? Number one, that's the structure of the data. And then we look into the content, specifically what is inside. Is it a number? If it's a high cardinality number, is it a low cardinality number? And based on that, we will apply the right mathematics, the right index that fit to the structure and to this small nanoblock. If you zoom out, we will do the same operation for the next block, but independent from the previous one. And we'll continue to do that. So we'll have millions of small nanoblocks. On each one, we have independent index that tailored into this small block, independent from the other blocks. So when new data arrive, when new schema arrive, we just will do that on the fly regardless the previous one. Not like databases that you need to rebuild indexes when data append, etc. So that's the core of the innovation. When you have these smart indexes that obviously give you the power to run really fast and scan much less data and get into the right data really fast, now the question is, okay, if the data lake is huge, what exactly I need to index? And here what we built is a layer, what we call the Varada autonomous smart indexing. And what this layer does is practically fed by continuous monitoring of all the SQLs that hitting the cluster. We learn something about, okay, let's see which tables are being queried, which columns are being queried, which specific partition in a specific column are being queried. Maybe in one of the tables, maybe we're asking for information that represent the last months, and other columns is the last 6 months. So specific columns, specific partition in the column. We understand which tables are joined or which columns used to do join between tables. So we have really low-level understanding about what is your real use or real business needs and real patterns. Based on that, we will take dynamic decisions or instructions, what exactly need to be accelerated and how. We will do that via indexes and just apply the right indexes to the right parts based on that. And we'll also do smart caching. We will also cache specific data that can accelerate your workload. Think about this is done like continuously. So those instructions and guidance will keep optimized and be back to back with the way you use and query the data. So if I need to summarize that, we have super smart indexes and ability to cache data in a smart way. And that's actually managed by a machine learning layer that take autonomous and dynamic decisions about what to index and when to index and what to cache and when to cache. And that's something that's done autonomously without any need to interfere. We also enable the data platform to influence those decisions. So data platform guys can set some what we call business priorities. They can differentiate between workload A to workload B. For example, if let's assume that you have 5 different workloads. One workload could be thousands of queries that coming from the BI, from Tableau. An additional thousands of queries that coming from 100 analysts or let's say called data scientists that working and querying the data lake. And there are additional hundreds of queries that coming from your consumer app, your consumers that using their mobile and hitting the cluster with queries. So the data platform guys can prioritize between those workloads. If the data consumers workload is more important for the business than the data scientists, therefore Varada decision-making will take that into consideration. So here we take the autonomous decision-making that done autonomously and enable you to provide some business hints that we can take into consideration. As a result, you get a platform that actually works for you, adjust to your business needs and accelerate dynamically your workload.
So drawing upon what you have just said about the smart indexing, Nanoblocks, etc., now it's sort of like, it makes a lot of sense to me from my research that Varada and yourself are championing this whole concept of data lake analytics. Now, I must admit, it's rather new to me. When I first saw that terminology, I was like scratching my head. What is data lake analytics? Got to do a little bit more reading. Now I understand a little bit more. But for those listeners who are new to this, share with us, what is data lake analytics?
Yeah, so data lake is, if you look about the last, 20 years, okay, what happened, and with some real acceleration during the last few years and the upcoming few years, data become really complicated. Why? Because there's so much data. It's growing exponentially. And by the way, it's growing, if we back to the table illustration, it's growing in terms of number of rows and number of columns. The complexity is more about the number of columns, many more data sources, data coming from streaming, from apps, from if you're a retailer, it will come from shops, from manufacturing, from your website, it's coming from all over the place in a different formats, in a high pace, in ongoing changes in the schema. And by the end of the day, you as an enterprise, you need to make sense out of this data that coming from all over the place, and it's super complicated. So what does it mean? It means that, first of all, data become strategic and super important to companies because every company would like to be data-driven. They know how to translate that to money. Data platform become the DNA of the company because data is so centric for those companies. And if you think about it, the data and the volume become so more complicated and heterogeneous. So it's hard to solve. And data warehouse, the only ability to do that is to work hard and to model the data and organize the data in order to consume that. And it's not easy to do it. A standard complaint from enterprise, you can see someone saying, I just need 2 more dashboards and I'm waiting 6 months to get it. Why? Because it's hard. Just if you look about the data engineering, they're getting so many needs from the business. And they need to take the data and translate that and model it and cache it and copy that and put various data silos. That's the way of thinking of data warehouse. But if you think about what data lake came to solve, is actually exactly that. It's essentially a huge repository that usually is stored in an object store like S3. And it's include data from any source in any format. So that's, if you think about data lake, it's bring two main, a lot of value, of course, but I would point two important aspects. The first one, I would say, is like a single repository of everything that I said for multiple data sources, one go-to place. And thanks for Microsoft and Google and Amazon, they made it cheap and easy. And it's actually serving a lot of migration to the cloud, because companies that are having so much data from multiple data sources, this is a great go-to place to put their migration to the cloud. So the first thing is like it's easy and cheap to put your data in a single place, which enable different formats and different. The second thing that is more important in my perspective is the separation between data storage and data consumption. So unlike data warehouse, that there's a tight connection between what is the business needs and how I need to represent the data. And this is why it takes 6 months, because someone explains what he needs and someone needs to go to the data, take subset of the data, model and cache it and cube it and doing so many manipulation in order to enable the business to have interactive analytics. So the fact that data lake separate between the data storage to the data consumption, that means that you can put the data at its granular format and don't think who is going to consume it and when, because you don't know. The business is so dynamic. Even if you know what the business needs today, what happened tomorrow? The thinking of single repository of huge amount of data, hosting many data sources, and separation between the data storage to the data consumption. So now if you put Varada in the middle, we can actually make sense of this data and actually act as a serving layer, making sure that the business need gets interactive analytics.
Does it mean that it's the depth of the data warehouse and ETL then?
I don't think so. I think that data warehouse is a good solution, but it's definitely not the answer to any question as it's happened today. There is a reason why still we do see applications and BI running on data warehouse, because the data lake is huge and it's pretty complicated and if you think about the solution that exists today, they are all doing kind of brute force or full scan. Let me take even a zoom out on that. So if you think about cost and performance and level of agility or flexibility, I would divide the solution that exists today into 3 parts. The first part, and by the way, that's given by Gartner, the first part is like real-time data warehouse. That means that if you don't need any agility, any flexibility, the data is clear, you know exactly what you're looking for, therefore just optimize it. Things like solutions like Druid are a great example. Just make sure that you optimize exactly the data that you need to the queries that you need, because nothing is going to change. Optimize that and you have it. No need for that's the best solution. If you need a little bit more flexibility, you go into the data warehouse area. That means that you go back into this catch-22. Tell me what do you need, and I will take part of the data and I will organize that for you. I will make sure that the right data is ready for you and sorted and cached, etc. It can take me sometimes few months or few weeks to do that, but I will organize the data back to what you need. And companies like Amazon and other working hard to make it easier, but that's the state of mind. And then you go into data lake, that you want full flexibility. You don't want to commit about what exactly you need, because every time you need something else. So you want full flexibility. If you want full flexibility, you actually compromise on cost and performance, because the way to apply analytics on data lake will actually apply brute force or full scan. So this compromise between cost and performance and agility and flexibility, that's something it's like represent the day-to-day of data engineering worldwide. What we bring to the table is actually to eliminate this compromise. By doing this smart indexing, we enable you to enjoy or benefit from the agility and flexibility without the need to pay the price for cost and performance via the indexing. So back to your original question about data warehouse should disappear? No. But many workloads that goes today to data warehouse will shift to data lake because it's easier, it's faster, it's cheaper to do that on a data lake with solutions such as Varada. I think that data warehouse will always have room, but it's not an answer for everything. We'll see workload shifting from data warehouse to a data lake. You practically can do data warehousing on a data lake. You don't need data warehouse per se to do that.
I find that some organization would be quite rigid and strict, though, when it comes to the separation of the data lake versus the data warehouse, and then subsequently the BI layer. And that separation is so rigid to the extent that the analytic team are often not allowed to go and use the data from the data lake directly unless it has to pass through all different layers. What would be your advice to them about this sort of separation of different layers?
I think that it's like many other things, like when you need to adopt new technology, specifically for big data analytics, is the number one guidance would be let's identify the use cases that actually require agility and flexibility. And there are so many of them that that's a classic move to data lake. And if it's come with the benefits that we can cope with the business needs way faster, and we can do that with cost reduction, so why not? It's like opportunity. When opportunity occur, and there's enough motivation, people will go to that. Exactly why data lake is on the rise, because it makes a lot of value to companies. And solution like Varada is actually enabled to take it to the next level. Okay, you have a big repository of the data. Let's help you to make sense out of it and not just copy and move the parts of the data lake into data warehouse and cause ongoing frustration from lack of performance and slow time to market and TCO and cost, etc.
Now, that being said, what is your advice there for the organization to think about employing these data, this architecture of data lake analytic into their existing technology stacks?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the best advice is to look for the right use cases that fit into this, because let's look about, data scientists. Data scientists cannot work on data warehouse because they need the entire perspective of all the data and, the entire duration. So this is a classic use of data lake, of course. But in order to give business enough tools to translate insights to money, we need to give them the flexibility to slice and dice and deep dive into the data. And they cannot commit to what exactly they're looking for, because you deep dive into the data and then you scratch your head and say, okay, let's not correlate this with what I found out a month ago. And it's not something that I want now to explain to my product manager and head of engineering that that's what I need, and within 2 months they will get it. I just want to do that now. I need this flexibility. I just realized something and I want to correlate that. And I want to get it in an interactive way. I don't want to wait now 2 hours to get an answer. And it's not something, because it's interactive thinking as well. So identify those use cases, and that exists in many verticals. If you think about trends, segmentations, anomaly, everything that you need to correlate data and make sense out of it and slice and dice deep in the data, that's something that, it cannot predict what you need ahead of time. And therefore, you need agility and flexibility, and therefore, data lake is the solution for you.
On that note, what sort of performance improvement that you have seen when that smart indexing is applied into the data lake?
Yeah. So we see improvements from performance point of view from 10 to 100 faster. And let me be more specific, because it's managed. So indexes makes a big difference when you go deep into the data. The more selective you are, let's go back to this 850 billion rows across 1,000 columns. So if you look for a specific, I don't know, 1 million or 2 million or 150,000, this is a needle in a haystack. This is a highly selective query. That's where index makes a huge boost. Can be close to 100 times faster than any other data lake solution that exists today. If you go to the other side, that's what we call full scan. If your task is just go through the entire data and just count everything. In this edge case, indexes does not add any value. We will be good as any other solution. And everything that in between is depend of the level of selectivity. But the true or the more interesting analytics is when you go deep into the data. So what those indexes bring is, as I mentioned, one is performance boost. The second thing is TCO reduction, because we are much more efficient. Being efficient means consume much less CPU. Consuming much less CPU, that means that I can host many more queries, that I can do more concurrency, I can boost your concurrency. And on top of that, from the business point of view, the ability to do that autonomously actually enable me to address business needs pretty fast and change the business needs and cope with the business, as I mentioned.
I'm curious to know, could this smart indexing be applied on the relational database and transactional system though? So far, we have been talking about how to apply this smart indexing in the data lake. I'm curious, can that be applied? And part of the reason why it got me thinking about that is considering the performance that is doing so well, but also is where the technology is heading, is that no longer we are still doing the way that how we do things, which is the batch data processing, bring you the data in the data lake and then data warehouse, and then you build the analytic on top of these data sitting in the data warehouse, and then subsequently you do the modeling and then apply the result back. More and more companies start embedding the analytic as part of their business operation, as part of their business IT system. That being said, the ability to build a model and understand and quickly to get and do all the analysis is even more important than before. And a classic example would be the recommendation engine on YouTube or Facebook or even Amazon shopping. It makes me realize that this indexing is more important than ever. But the question then is, can that be applied on the relational database and transactional system then, in order to be able to further enabling the embedded analytics?
Yeah, so you mentioned a few things. The importance of indexing become more and more relevant. It's super relevant today in the ocean of data. And to be honest, indexing is not enough. Dynamic indexing is the right answer, because you need to, you cannot index everything. You just need to dynamically index whatever needed and be able to do that. So that's the importance of indexes. You asked me before about focus. Indexes, we did not invent the indexes. It's, started from rational databases, etc. Our focus is modern data lake, cloud, etc. We are not focusing on regular databases, etc. We have our own techniques and own optimizations. We simply cannot do it all. Obviously, the concept can be adopted, but that's not something that we are expert. That's not our focus. Our focus is really on data lake. We're looking into modern architecture, and that's where we put our bet. More than that, just to to give you a little bit more, even additional example about why we are that focused. Even with SQL engine, we took a bet and we adopted Presto as the SQL engine that we're actually relying on. So we're saying that's already happening and well adopted and have a huge community behind it. Why should we invent the wheel? So our focus actually, we built on Presto and our indexes tied in with Presto. So we benefit from both. We benefit from the innovation, the pace, the adoption, the fact that it's open source and a large community. And then we apply our smart indexing. And then the way I used to look at it is 1 + 1 = 3. So we benefit from that. We are not inventing the wheel, and we're taking that into the modern architecture, which is data lakes today.
Now, Presto has been mentioned a lot in the website and some of the research that I've done. For the listener who are not familiar about Presto, do you mind to give a quick elevator explanation about what Presto is and how it comes into the picture?
Yeah, sure. So Presto invented by Facebook. Obviously, probably the first company that really dealt with a true big data and so many data sources and complexity of data that we spoke about. So they looked for a SQL engine that enabled them to slice and dice data from multiple data sources. So what if you need to join your data, the data lake with MySQL and Postgres, multiple data sources, but you want to do that with a single SQL. So that's led to innovation that they open source, which called Presto. And, as many other good examples that started to be adopted for mainly in the Bay Area at the beginning, like from Netflix and Uber and Lyft and Comcast and many others. And it started to build a community around that. And when you have a community, you have contributors, and that's become better and better. On top of that, Starburst actually took Presto to the next level and providing some additional capabilities to Presto. So while maintaining the open source, which is today Trino, solutions such as adding more connectors to Teradata, to Oracle, to MySQL, and optimize that. That's one area. And the second thing is management tools and support for open source. Exactly what Cloudera did to Hadoop. So this community and those companies like Starburst, like Ahana, that pushing the community and adding more value, so creating more adoption and more awareness. So I'm very happy with the bet that we took on Presto community. So we benefit from the community, we benefit from the innovation, and we also contribute to this community. So we are pretty involved, and we're very happy with the bet we took.
Fascinating. Now, share with the listeners some of the real-life success story of the businesses that is using the data lake analytics and also the product provided by Varada.
In a way, if you look about use cases can be anything from anomaly detection to needle in a haystack to segmentation to trends to anything that related to personalization, anything that require deep slice and dice into your data. If you look about those use cases, it could be behavior analytics, for example. So we can see verticals such as streaming companies that obviously would like to better understand how the consumers using their data, what they like, what they don't like, what influence them to purchase more, what influence them to leave. We see use cases such as anomaly detection and trends in cybersecurity. It's all about identifying fast anomaly and some trends that need immediate reaction. So cybersecurity, we see several companies taking advantage of the next generation of SIEM, SOC, and anomaly detection and moving from the old architecture, which is on-prem, Splunk, etc., into a data lake and a modern solution. We see companies in a healthcare that getting, during the last, I would say, 1.5 years, get a huge boost. Remote healthcare and everything that related to take advantage of data. So we see a lot of boost in healthcare and their need to take advantage of data, to react to data, to move to modern solution. We see retail with obvious need to better understand how they operate and what consumers need and trends, etc. We see some trends in manufacturing. Think about a company that have many factories, that a lot of data from quality perspective, from warehousing perspective, comes from the factories, and there is a need to make sense of everything from quality perspective, from planning perspective, etc. So it's a lot of information coming from different places, and there is a need for the business to operate. We also have a company that's doing research on genes. So, it's like learning about there's so many attributes and you need to slice and dice the data and learn from that. So that's a lot of companies focusing on this specific area and try to influence our life and our health. So that's another area that we see a trend.
Now, for the listener who is this chief data officer who is listening to this episode, and he is going to tell his CEO and say, I would like to apply data lake ability. How should they explain to the CEO or the board member to say budget that he's getting? What are the key benefits that he's going to deliver by doing all of these things?
Yeah, everything always starts with a problem and with a pain. If you don't have a pain, it's a nice to have and it's a different story. And I think that the way, and it should be pretty straightforward and will get better or easier during the upcoming few years. Because all this complexity of data today create meaningful pain in terms of efforts, in terms of cost, in terms of lack of ability of the business to actually translate insights to money. So this is a real pain. And I think that the number one explanation about why there is a need, because this architecture of data lake, analytics on top of data lake, actually address those aspects. I think that the fact that data lake is getting more traction, we will see a demand, okay, I moved to the data lake, now I need to take it to the next level, how I can actually make sense of this data. And that's why I believe that during the upcoming few years, we'll see meaningful demand for actually analytic solution on top of your data lake. And that's where we are, and that's the bet we have.
Thank you so much for that. And that brings us almost to the end of this interview for the podcast. Now, these are the two questions that I normally ask every single one of my guests. My first question for you is, what is your most important first principle?
I would say that focus, I mentioned that before, easy to save and do, because as I mentioned, you have so many options to do sidetracks. If you can focus on your key differentiator, in our case is indexing. And the example I gave you about the SQL engine, we can say, okay, let's build the entire solution and build our own SQL engine. No, we bet on something that exists and we wanted to focus on our key innovation, which is indexing. Of course, we added dynamic and smart, etc., but this is our core innovation. So my number one advice is actually try to focus on your key differentiator and remind yourself that that's the way to succeed, and do not go sideways.
I think that reminded me of what Steve Jobs always say, that he say the reason that he is winning is because their ability to say no to 1,000 things instead of saying yes and only just focus on a very, very few things that matters.
Yeah, he actually, the way I see Steve Jobs, to be honest, is like, obviously one of the biggest influence on our life today and in the future. But it's pretty amazing, since I was in the mobile industry at Sun Microsystems and embedded, etc. At early 2000, he looked at how memory become cheaper and smaller in size, and it's like exponential change. He looked at the network and how it become faster and faster in exponential. He looked at the CPU and the ability to have processing. And then he did pretty simple decisions. So he forecast that for the upcoming few years. And he made the assumption that in your hand, you will have a CPU stronger than you have in your PC at home. And this was like, to be honest, not a genius assumption. It was clear because the graph shows that. But he was that smart to dream and to say, I assume that you will have the speed of network, with your mobile. I assume that you have ability to store so much storage in your hand. And he took those assumptions and rebuilt the thinking about what is mobile phone. And again, he focused on that. He made the assumption, he didn't have any fear that it won't happen. He said that will happen regardless me. and he focused on this innovation. In a way, I believe that data lake is the same story. So someone else is actually driving data lake adoption. Someone else driving move from on-prem to cloud. Someone else driving the extensive need to actually take advantage of data. All I need to do is just to make sure that I have the tool to make that happen. All the rest is happening and growing, and the demand is happening. So we cannot compare ourselves to Steve yet, but that's the state of mind.
Speaking of that state of mind, it resonates with me in a way that if I were to apply the concept of the economics, is that I think it's super duper important to look at the macro economy, because often the structural change and the structure of the macro economy is really what is going to drive the booming industry A versus the going down of the other industry, such as the macroeconomics of like what you were describing, the PC, the processing power of all of those chips. It basically means that you would have the ability to have a mobile phone that is stronger and more powerful than the PC just a few years ago, right? I think that ability is so important. My question then for you is, how do you train your employees, especially those who are still young or just graduating? How do you train them to have this macro view so that by the time as they are progressing their career, you're ready to hand over them the decision making so that you trust that they will be able to bring your company to the right direction?
Yeah, it's not easy to move from micro to macro, because if you think about the day-to-day of employee, it's super micro on how we need to implement the feature. And my role as a CEO is actually from time to time zoom out for them. And the best zoom out that I can imagine is actually share customer feedback of what they actually built. And to be honest, a lot of the features that we are building came from our customers, came from our prospect, came from the trials that we did with customers. And the best learning is actually not in our lab, it's actually the loop back. And I think that the best way to drive motivation for our employees is actually to show them and implement the loop back from customers. So doing my best to create this loop back in a continuous mode.
My final question for you is, what is one book that you have read and thought it would have been better for your younger self to have?
Yeah, I was asked about it several times, so I will give you a kind of an old question, but I think an old answer, but I feel that it's a good one. I think around 25 years, the Crossing the Chasm, I would say that it touched the right theory or the right do and don't do for startup at our age. Practically divide the customers in different groups, but for startups, the move from what we call the early adopters to early majority is the most critical and important stage. And that's Crossing the Chasm. That's actually looks like the right feeling of being in a startup, because you make many bets and you have limited budget and limited opportunities. And you need to drive those bets with your belief under the assumption that you're doing the right things. And I think that this description of how in every stage you need to change your thinking, change the way you develop, change the way you market, change the way you message, change the way you take decisions. That's a very structured way of thinking about how to drive startup in this ocean.
For someone who is running a startup, how could they tell that their product or their company, their startup, is finally moving from the stage of early adopters to the early mass user?
Yeah, it's mainly about if you start to see repeating patterns, that you start to see that whatever you build with your design partners, that maybe took several iterations, etc., take it as it is and fit to a customer that you just met yesterday without any need to change it. That means that you start to move from early adopters to early majority. It does not mean that there are no issues and no opportunities to improve. But that means that you did something right and you start to see repeated patterns.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of these, Eran. I really enjoyed that whole session about understanding this data lake analytic and smart indexing, and also the structural change that we probably witnessing in front of our eyes right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.